Hello, my name is Hannes. I'm from Bigbank, and Fred now gave me the slides. Thank you very much, Fred. Hello. Today I'm here to talk about how to make dev teams happy through component libraries and the issues you immediately run into after an in-house component library is implemented by multiple teams. So, as I said, my name is Hannes Aasamets. I'm a full-time front-end developer working in Bigbank. And perhaps not everyone knows what a front-end component library is. Hopefully they do. So, to put it simple and short, it's a collection of user interface elements. And why? Because it helps to build consistent user experiences. There are plenty of them around. One of them is Bootstrap, one of the oldest ones. Probably also the most popular only because it's the oldest ones. There are others. In 2014, Google formulated material design. Bootstrap came out in 2011. There's a, just saying that Salesforce also has a quite neat component library going on. Hashtag just saying. And I'm here to talk about interface components, which is the name of the component library that we are building in Bigbank. So here's an example of a typical component that's for pagination. If you come across something like this, you would probably imagine that let's not rewrite it again. I don't want to write that CSS for those corners, for anything, but not those. So what the component library provides is a really simple interface for the product developer, a value and the length. Value would be the current page that the user is on, and the length would be the amount of pages shown at once. And if there was another flavor of this component, or it has to do something else as well, then it could be applied simply by adding a prop to the component template, to the user's template that is, for example, searchable. Now the end user can click on the page number and start typing if they want to shortcut jump into the specific page. Yeah, another example of what it would be like to remove design inconsistencies from different products from different countries. This component, for example, doesn't have much functionality, but design is also a functionality. And the product developer only has to provide those props, those strings in there, and all the CSS and all the layout problems, even responsiveness, is handled from the component library side. So that CSS problems would be a little bit more contained. Here's another example. I will come to a little bit more complex example. I will come back to this later when I'm demoing the rest of the style guide. We are using Vue style guide assistant, which also enables code sandbox. Just sandbox for code, not to be mixed with code sandbox, which is also a very nice tool. So that for each example in the documentation, we can use any other component, even though this specific example is, for example, showing how a login form would look like inside a card component. card can be recognized by the round corners and the drop shadow. Right. So it has a lot going on here in the code itself. So who gets value from all this? When the same product is implemented in different countries, it doesn't get rewritten. In Bigbank, there are 8 product teams that are actively benefiting from this library. So, but in the end, it's the end user that will get a smoother experience using the product. And how to create it. Some people are already creating those. Some maybe don't have that experience. I can tell you how we did it in Bigbank, and it's working pretty well. The designers map the product, they talk to people, they find the common pieces, and in fact, they are those that have the overview of the needs of different product teams. So that in the end, from day to day, the designers are those that we can also ask to prioritize features. It's an ongoing back and forth process, but the designers are definitely on top of things as well. So the developers receive some InVision design spec, and then the developers, front-end developers, look at this and wonder that how could we split this into sensible pieces? Okay, that looks like a header there, and those inputs are probably components. And then we add a public header component to our style guide, and it will have just 2 props, the title prop, the icon prop, because from page to page, the icon might be different, and the developer in the product team simply fills in the strings. So they have to bother only with code and not with design problems, not with CSS, in an ideal world. Another component there, input. So I can imagine that probably the product developer would want to go through the component library and find the input. Then they see that the design spec said for their current page that, hey, it also needs a tooltip. So on top of the default input, there's also this help text prop that they can use. And again, they don't have to manually align those question marks there. They don't have to bother with that. This way, in 5 countries, we can hope that those question marks more or less look the same. And this is how, after it's implemented in front-end style guide, this is how the actual product looks like in 3 different countries. You see that it more or less looks the same. I will come back to this afterwards, why it's not exactly the same. We're pretty happy at first that it looks more or less the same. We have recognized that ownership leads to results. And I am really lucky to work in a dedicated dev team of 4 people with this library. So from the technical side, you probably want to choose a framework. In Bigbank, we chose Vue. We are using Jest and Puppeteer for tests and screenshot tests. And we bundle the package with Rollup. Some people are probably doing it in React, the whole framework thingy, and nevertheless using Jest. So in Bigbank, Vue was decided to be used as the front-end framework across all the countries, across all the products by the tech leads. So that has really helped to smoothen everything that can go awkward. Probably the thing you want to do is agree on the API. For us, it's we just have the component events and component props that cannot change. So this is a contract, an agreement between us, the library makers, and the users of the library that this will not break, that these events and props will stay the same unless there's a major version change. We are using Semver. And the process, how we are creating it from day-to-day basis is that the developers consult the designers to make better decisions on the API, on the semantics, on the documentation. And even though it's the front-end developer that that designs the interface for the component, who makes the semantic decisions whether to use this or that HTML element, and who writes the actual documentation, none of it happens without consulting the designer. So it's back and forth process. The designers are also reviewers of pull requests, and they run the feature branches locally to conduct visual review. So this has worked out pretty well, I would say. And one of the key factors is also that we're sharing the same room. We're 7 people in the same room, the designers and the interface component developers. Fleep channel is also another channel of communication where the devs, but not only the library devs, but also the product devs are asking questions. So it's open for everyone to see the current state of things, where what's hot right now regarding which bugs go first. So people can follow, people can intervene. So, but I wanted to focus on one topic. This was just an introduction. How to get other teams to use your component library. When every team believes that their case is special, that their case cannot be made universal. Well, when the same product is implemented in different countries, it shouldn't get rewritten. And usually those very special cases are not that special at all. But explaining it is not made easier by the fact that 8 product teams are actively using the library, and each product team is approximately 10 people, including QAs, PMs, analytics. Well, having Vue across the whole company does make it easier. I'm not sure what would be the questions I would be facing otherwise. And our main approach, how to have a smooth dev experience for our users. Well, the main thing is to ask what the devs understand when they see the documentation. They're probably going like, hey, is my component here? Hey, this one looks a little bit similar. Is it this one? I'm gonna probably overwrite some CSS and it will be fine. Don't do it. So what we have what we have come to so far is something you might want to call docs-driven development. It's not as official as it looks with all the capital letters, but it is a pretty good approach. So to write the documentation from the user's perspective, writing the API first, designing the API as it would be nice to use as a user, writing the documentation as it would be nice to be received by the user, instead of throwing it in as the last thing. Yeah, I also finished the documentation page. They will figure it out. It also works pretty neat to use the style guide itself as a development ground, actually developing the components in the style guide itself. I guess the documentation shouldn't be scientific, too scientific. It should be more playful, so it would be fun to read. In the end, you just need to get that piece of information and in a not too dry way, but obviously the documentation must maintain high quality nevertheless and be precise. So we benefit from code sandbox, sandbox, another one word. So Fred, can you, thank you. So if a product developer would come and open the component library and would be after some kind of a card, would search for it. Ah, here's a success one, pretty neat. Okay, all it takes was to write status success. What about with less success? Okay, status alert. I will take this one. Or total victory. Same goes, or this login card example I was showing you earlier. So perhaps the product owner would like to play through something, some scenario which is coming up in this or that page design in the about to be launched product. Hopefully not yet, hopefully not launched tomorrow if they are still playing it through, but they can just add more inputs. Actually, in this sandbox, any component from the whole library is available, or actually anything that we expose there. It doesn't necessarily mean it's also shipped with the package. It's just available for the playground. And the designers are using it as well to see if an implemented feature is working the way they expected, or to see if they understand it, or to see if a combination of ideas they might have can be played through or not. And then come ask questions. Hey, I tried this there. It didn't really work that way. Can you explain? And then there's a solid ground to start off from. Fred, can I have my slides back? Thank you. So, documentation should be good, but there is no good documentation for poor API. So API itself, obviously, should be readable and self-explanatory. Like the author of Clean Code says, long variable name is better than long comment. So if I would want this red error message in the bottom, maybe the designer tells me that, hey, it should appear as a bubble in some case only. Then if the interface for that was that, yeah, a regular input, but this time the default error message shouldn't be that default, it should be a bubble, then this 20 characters long prop isn't that bad. It's pretty readable from the first sight. And I wouldn't want to see a prop of 4 first letters, E, M, A, B, any abbreviation, I think. So what else can we do to make the dev experience a little bit smoother using the component library? Screenshot tests do provide a lot of confidence, especially when developing the library and you're not sure if what you just did broke something in the other end of the library or not. Like that anecdote about CSS goes that a man walks into a bar and the stool falls over in another bar. Yeah, so screenshot tests help to prevent that. Or at least they let you know what you did. And we have unit tests for functionality. And another topic or another aspect of running things smoothly for the devs is involving devs, product devs also, making them understand that they should also contribute into the library they're using, because it's actually a common library. There is some maintenance people working around it, but having everyone involved is something that we consider important. And it's also the product owners that should consider contributing to this inner source or open source, however you want to call it, project as part of the sprint. That is something that should be happening. So technology and business side should both agree on the necessity to contribute. And when contribution is done from whomever, even if it's from our team or not from our team, or whoever contributes, there will be comments. There should be comments. And pull request is a really good place to decide what this code should do. Instead of chat, instead of real-life chat, which is also good, but it's really nice to have everyone who wants to see the very place which is relevant to the whole comment, the code itself. What else helps? Knowing the user, knowing the product devs, going there, asking questions, working together with them, helping them out with whatever falls short, participating, inviting them over. It all helps. Trying to understand why was it a certain tester that was blocking this or that feature, or what's going on exactly. And another thing that we have found really beneficial was our hackathons with other teams. So these can, the duration could be either a day or 2 or 3, or it has been even 5 days when we helped to build the product from scratch to give them a good head start using the library. Other hackathons have been to write front-end tests, implementing new versions of the library, creating new functionality. In general, everyone has agreed so far that these are a good idea. It's even better if these hackathons happen sooner than later, not when things run short. Throwing more people at fire is not usually an answer in software development. And also from day-to-day basis, involving the product devs in the planning, so that when we are crafting a new feature, then we try to imagine who will benefit from the most, and sometimes inviting them over or asking them directly that what will be the context, and perhaps there is something that we don't understand about that context that they understand better. And we do have tickets coming out, flying in from all different teams, so that we have some stuff to do in our backlog, so that everyone can report, but after that, hopefully also contribute. So the bottom line is empathy, looking at things from the user's perspective helps the most to run things smoothly. We also have very reactive live chat support and humble but firm code reviews. So staying latest is crucial for shorter feedback loop. Having all the product teams on the latest version of the component library helps us to find bugs earlier. So it's something that we and the component library makers probably agree that this is something you need to fight with all the time. Even though the users would prefer to have someone else take the first flight and find the bugs for them. So probably here, the first one on the left was slightly in the Swedish loan application. It was slightly different paddings, so it was a slightly earlier version of the component library. Not sure if it's even noticeable. It's there. So thank you. This was my 5 cents on how to make running component libraries slightly smoother. So if there are questions, I'm happy to answer them. Yes, please.
One, two, three.
Hello.
Thanks for the talk. Now, given that we're talking about a Bigbank, right, I'd imagine that your application gets relatively large, right? Now, the question is, how do you deal if you do with those undefined is not a function problems? Maybe you use something like a TypeScript or a flow, or if yes, then tell why. If no, then tell why as well. Thank you.
So I didn't catch the middle part, but as I understood, the main question was that are we using TypeScript or some other means of catching flaws?
Yep.
Okay. We are not using TypeScript. Some of the product teams are, and it's how much I've been missing TypeScript. Not that much, but there have been times, few times, but I guess not enough to start implementing everything in TypeScript. But I'd say screenshot tests are, for this kind of a front-end component library, screenshot tests are providing pretty solid feedback that something is different than it was earlier, and maybe you want to have a second look at it, because not after every change you can you look at through the whole component library, because CSS cascades, right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one. Thank you for the presentation. In your opinion, when should you build a library from scratch, and when should you at least start from an existing one?
Good question. Ketmar, are you going to answer that later?
Oh yeah?
What would I say? I will let Ketmar answer.
All right, fair. Any other questions? Yeah.
At the risk that this question can be kind of asked anyway later, I would like to ask, do we have some conventions in naming? Like I've noticed that you, for example, append item, you have appended that item at least to one of the components, because usually when you have a component library, like there are different kinds of components, like you can have repeatable components that can be only met, that you can only find in a group, like, or you can have standalone components and so on. Do you have some basically naming conventions for that?
So we do have the BB prefix in order to separate those Vue components that come straight from the interface components library from any other component, because in Vue anything is a component. I was going to say what was that about item again that you said that abandoned item?
Because you used item there, I understood it like this, that you probably would have used this component in a group, like you would have several components, components of this sort.
Okay, no, we're not using specifically for that. For component naming, we do not have some higher resolution of some syntax separated. We are using PEM for CSS, and we are calling each component's outermost wrapper. We're assigning them a BB prefixed class name as well, so that even though it's not really necessary from Vue side to have it, we found it nifty for ourselves to have a unique name for the component outermost wrapper. For example, other things don't pop my mind right now.
Okay, thanks.
All right, if there are no other questions, let's thank again Hannes and